Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What's something effed up that you witnessed as a child that you were oblivious to until you became older? Not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was 5 or 6, my mom used to never want to get out of bed and just kept saying she was sick. Finally, my stepdad took her to a hospital where she stayed for nearly a month. I thought it was so cool that her hospital let her do arts and crafts all the time. Plus, she got better and started doing arts and crafts with me too when she got home. I remember telling her that I wished I could go to the hospital and draw all day. She sat me down and told me that she hoped I would never get sick like she did. But if I do, there's nothing wrong with needing help to get better, even if you have to go somewhere for a little while to do it. It wasn't until I was probably 12 or 13, I didn't want to get out of bed myself, that it clicked that the hospital she had gone to was a mental health hospital. But because of her, I've never felt shame about needing therapy when things are getting bad, or even just to maintain a healthy mindset. My really odd babysitter got fired after she broke her glass table. I was playing with her son in another room when we heard a crash. She actually used to lock us in his room a lot. I don't recall much, but I remember a big commotion soon after. I remember my dad screaming at my mom that night about how I was banned from going over there ever again, and how it was my mother's fault for letting me go over there, which I didn't understand. Grew up to find out that babysitter was shooting up and fell through the glass table. Neighbors had heard the crash and rushed over and found her high as a kite with 2 kids locked in a room, me and her kid. When I was probably around 4 to 6 years old, I used to walk my grandma upstairs at her house every time we visited. She said she liked holding my hand. When I went to her room, she'd always compliment my shirts and be like, "What's this on your shirt here called?" And I'd say, "Oh, that's Winnie the Pooh," or whatever I was wearing. And she'd go on to tell me stories about the character or talk a bit about it. When I was 16, I learned she'd been blind for years. She'd ask me to hold her hand up the stairs so that I could help guide her to her room. She'd ask what was on my shirt because she could feel a pattern on it. I don't know why, but that kind of made me feel both sad and very loved. Like she couldn't see anymore, but she never wanted to let me worry about it and still managed to compliment what I was wearing all the time. She passed away while I was still very young, but those memories stuck like glue. Well, that was an absolute pleasure to read. You had a wonderful grandmother. Thanks for sharing. On a day out with my dad when I was little, I was playing in the park with a girl same age as me. I didn't know her, but she was on her own. Me and my dad left after an hour or so, leaving the girl on her own again. Obviously, my dad asked where her parents were, etc. Later on that night, there was a big story on the news about a girl who had been abducted, and all my family kept asking me questions about this little girl. It went right over my head at the time, being about 5 years old. 40 years later, I still think about her. Finding out that breaking a cup or spilling a drink wasn't a big deal was quite an eye-opener. Watching my girlfriend look at me like I'm nuts while I apologize for 20 minutes about dropping a glass of water made me reevaluate a lot of my childhood. Went to a friend's house on the weekend to play video games at the age of about 10. We had a good time and played a lot of games on the PS2. His mom came upstairs from the basement to ask if we wanted food. I turned around and said yes please, and before I could finish saying please, I noticed she had a black eye. I asked my friend what happened to his mom's face, and he said, "I can't say." 10-year-old me just said, "Oh, okay," and we proceeded to play video games. I didn't realize until I was about 19 this happened. I remember having a friend in high school whose parents were practically absent for most of his childhood. We used to make jokes about how jealous we were that he got to do basically whatever he wanted. He could sleep over at anyone's house any day of the week and never has a curfew. We got close and I started coming over to his house, which was very dirty to say the least. All the food was microwavable or non-perishable junk foods. They had a turtle tank in the kitchen between the sink and the stove, dishes always stacked, trash everywhere, etc. My friend would jump at the opportunity to stay at our house whenever our parents allowed, but I had to stop after a while because my friend didn't clean up after himself often. One day, my mom got upset after he left breadcrumbs all over our couch. She said he should know better. What would his parents think? Well, Mom, I don't think they'd think much. I proceeded to explain the conditions of his house. My mother was shocked and insisted he sleep over whenever he needed, but only if I made sure he learned to clean up after himself and was well fed. My mom used to let me watch cartoons late at night in her room as long as I didn't turn around or be too loud. I would always hear her flicking a lighter but didn't think too much about it. Years later, I found out she was smoking meth right behind me and blowing it out the window. She would use me as an excuse as to why she was awake if my stepdad woke up and caught her. Ugh. My uncle withdrawing from drugs. He was always the fun, loud, crazy uncle. I was around 10, and my mom and I came home from somewhere, and when we pulled up, he was sitting outside and said he needed a place to stay. My mom had to work the next day, and he and I were both hanging out at the house, and I could tell he didn't feel well and was dry heaving. I was really scary. I asked him if I should call 911, and he said no, he'd be okay. I had no idea he had drug problems until I became an adult. He passed away not too long ago from liver failure. Around age 5 to 7, I was out shopping with my mom when a man grabbed my hand and went to walk out of the shop with me. I didn't realize it wasn't my mom at first, but then I realized I didn't recognize him and pulled away, went absolutely dead weight. He looked down at me and said something like, "Come on, Tommy, your mom's been looking everywhere for you." When suddenly my sister and mom came to the rescue and he apologized, said he thought it was his nephew, and immediately left. Looking back, he was definitely a pedophile or kidnapper who was trying to take me to his van or something. I distinctly remember the entire shop full of people stopping and staring, and later the person working there allowing me to have a toy for free. I think it was his way of making me feel better, though I had no idea what had happened at the time. From 4th to 6th grade, I would go to a friend's regularly. For most of the friendship, his mom was super nice and engaged with us as kids, while his dad had always been this mysterious person at a high-powered job that everyone tiptoed around once he got home. My friend's attitude started changing near the end of our friendship, being abusive to his dog that he used to be obsessed with and overall high-strung. Parents were a little off compared to before. I stayed for dinner one night like I had before many times, and his mom sits down with a black eye. I was confused, like, how did she get hurt? It was a bit awkward, but the dad was there and those meals were more about finishing up than chatting. I guess everything was always less fun when he was around. My friend was not the same as he was before, more aggressive, and that wasn't my style. Our friendship just kind of waned off. I didn't realize till many years later that his dad was likely an abusive asshole, was hitting his wife and maybe his sons. I'll never forget the weird anxiety that filled the house in those last few months, and that my presence may have been a kind of reprieve period where the dad had to play it cool. The anxiety did end up pushing me away, and looking back, I hope my friend, his brother, and mom got out of the situation. When I was 5, my dad would take me to the park on a Sunday sometimes. Sometimes he would then take me to this woman's house nearby. They would sit in front of the TV and put on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Then they would go upstairs. I never made the connection they were having sex because I didn't know what sex was. My mother left him anyway when I was older for being a gambler and a drunk. I think about it now and again how oblivious I was. That a substance or a thing could even for a moment overtake the unconditional love a parent has for a child should go to show you how powerful addiction can truly be. When I was about 10, my dad offered to buy me candy and stopped at a store to run in. We had a long drive back, and I asked where the candy was. He said in the bag in the back, but that he'd get it for me when we got home since he was driving. I said, "It's okay, I can reach it." And as I reached for it, he slapped me and yelled that I can't wait until I get home. My father had never hit me before that, and never did again after. The most confusing part to me was the look of utter sadness and shock on his face after he hit me. My dad was an alcoholic and killed himself before my 18th birthday. It wasn't until I was older that I understood he had bought a bottle of vodka and forgot to place it in its own bag, or that I hadn't seen him drinking water all those times he disappeared to his truck and I snuck to the window to watch where he went. I was 5 years old the first time my mother told me she was going to kill herself and it was all my fault, but also later in the same day that I'm the only reason she didn't kill herself. That probably wasn't the actual first time either, just the first I remember. But whatever you experience as a kid is normal because you have nothing to compare it to. You have no idea you're being head-effed. I got to 41 before I realized, in fact, it is not the job of the eldest sibling to shield the younger siblings from their parents. It took my son saying, "But you've never done anything even a bit like that to us," for it to all click into place. A guy tried and failed to kidnap our neighbor's baby over a $20 debt. We lived in Navy housing in Charleston, South Carolina when I was a kid. This was in the 80s. We were at the neighbor's house. This neighbor owed someone else in the neighborhood $20 and hadn't paid. While we were all in the living room or dining area, we heard the loud sound of shattering glass come from the baby room. The baby cried out and everyone rushed down, but the guy was gone before we got there. The guy apparently tried to pry open a locked window with a putty knife, and pressure on the frame caused the glass to shatter. The dude left the putty knife and the note he'd written in the windowsill when he took off. The baby was fine. I heard the grown-ups talk about knowing exactly who it was. I also remember them deciding not to call the police and to go deal with it in person. I saw a girl standing on the wrong side of the barrier holding onto the railing when my family drove over a bridge and some people on the path talking to her. I thought nothing of it and just wondered how she was going to get back on the right side. I used to hang onto the railing and walk on the wrong side of a path at school that was about a meter high, so I just thought she was mucking around in a more extreme adult level way, chatting to her friends. I didn't realize until I remembered it randomly as an adult, and I have no idea what the outcome was. There's been petitions to raise the height of the safety barriers on that bridge to reduce the number of suicides, but unfortunately, nothing has been done. My dad carrying my mom down the stairs when she overdosed on pills trying to kill herself. A few years later, she rented a convertible Mustang, and I wanted to check it out. My dad came out of the house screaming at me to get away from her. She left, and the police showed up. I later learned that she was schizophrenic and had tried to kill me. The reason she tried to kill herself was to save me before she actually tried. Eventually, the disease won the battle and her brain turned to madness. When I was younger, I never really saw my two oldest brothers because they were always in and out of jail. One day my mom tells me they will both be released on the same day, and I'd get to see them when I get home from school, first grade. As I got home, I raced to the front door to see them finally, only to see my brother and top of my other one trying to stab him in the face with a kitchen knife on the couch. My body instantly froze, and my mom shoved me out of the way to separate them. I never understood why my brothers would fight like that until I grew up realizing my kitchen knife wielder brother was addicted to meth and would steal from us to get some drugs, so my brother had confronted him ensuing the scuffle. I'm 25 now. My brother is still addicted to meth and in and out of jail, currently in right now. My other brother got his life together and has made a living for himself. It's not something oblivious, but as a child I didn't understand why this would happen. I still get nightmares or flashbacks about this fight till this day. When I was 5 or 6, I lived in a complex with 8 units. One day, my dad asked to jump through one of the unit's bathroom windows, run through the house, and open the front door. I didn't really want to, as an old lady lived there that I didn't know well and thought I'd get in trouble if I got caught. Anyway, off I go, through the window and make my way to the front door. As I get to the lounge, she was on the lounge chair slumped with her eyes opened, looking straight at me. Scared the crap out of me. It was creepy, but more so remember thinking I'd been caught breaking into her house. Anyway, opened the front door and run past my parents and neighbors straight home. Ambulance came not long after, but didn't really click what was going on. I later realized in my teens she was dead. Apparently had been for a few days. Everyone in the complex was worried about her, so used me to get in the house to check on her welfare. 30 plus years later, can still picture it. That a substance or a thing could even for a moment overtake the unconditional love a parent has for a child should go to show you how powerful addiction can truly be. When I was a kid, somewhere below 10, ended up on an AOL chat room with someone that claimed to also be a kid. While I was somewhere below 10, he claimed to be 14 or 13, I can't quite remember. Well, he gave me this phone number to call him on and told me that if his voice sounded really deep, it's just because he has a deep voice for his age. Still in the chat room, he then tried to find out where I lived, which thankfully I didn't tell him. I did know my address by heart at that point, but just didn't feel like telling him. I told him I'd give him a call in a few minutes. I logged off and I proceeded to grab the house phone to call the number. I don't know if I entered the number wrong or what, but this automated voice comes up and asked if I wanted to accept some charges for the call. If there was one thing I knew, it was that if I had any money charged to the house, I would have gotten a good ass whooping. So I noped out of the call pretty quickly. I never wanted to call another number that someone gave me online again. Wasn't until a few years ago that I realized he was an online predator, trying to find his way to a very young child. My dad had a rare type of cancer that affected the bones in his face and jaw. When I was 5 years old, he had a tumor the size of a softball removed from one cheek. They removed his cheekbone, bottom jaw, nerves, lymph nodes, everything. The surgeon did a horrible job with the skin graft and spaced the stitches way too far apart. A couple weeks after his first operation, the wound got infected. I remember my mom and I were coming home after school one day, and it was unusual to see that my dad was also home that early. He was getting out of his car as we were pulling up to the house, and the stitches on his face had started to rip open. The infected gunk and his skin started falling out of his face as he ran into the house. That was just one of the many horrible things that happened while my dad was sick. Being a kid and witnessing that level of gore so frequently desensitized me to it. I didn't realize how bad it was growing up in a household with a dying parent until I was much older. Holy moly, seeing his face rip open like that was not part of a normal childhood at all. My mother, in a drug-induced postpartum depression mental break, screaming into the phone that if my dad didn't come home right at that second, she was going to kill us kids. We weren't even doing anything because we knew she wasn't completely okay mentally. I remember after screaming into the phone, she slammed the phone into the wall holder, ran or hobbled to the kitchen, and grabbed a big chef's knife. I grabbed my newborn brother, while my younger sister grabbed our youngest sister and hid under a table where she couldn't reach us because she was still healing from having a cesarean section and such, couldn't bend over. I thought that kind of behavior was fairly normal, and that all mothers wanted to end their children after having a baby for the longest time. I didn't realize how messed up that was until I was a teen. I was 6 when that story occurred. I will be 26 this year. My mother has been clean for at least the last 5 years. She does not remember that night, and if she does, she won't talk about it. Honestly, I don't blame her for not wanting to talk about it. It was a shitty time in her life, and she used drugs to cope or escape her feelings and thoughts.